All right. I am here with Jon Hathaway. Jon, thank you for your time. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me on.
Not at all. Not at all. I'll start with really the elephant in the room, right? It's been a long time that you've been out of the game, or not out of the game, I should say, but out of the octagon, out of professional fighting.
Yeah.
What brings you back? Why come back?
I mean, the love of fighting, really. Obviously, my last fight was not necessarily the best performance. It's definitely not the way I want to leave kind of competition. Obviously, I've been dragged out for over 8 years of competition, not being able to do it. So it's definitely, I'm only coming back because I love doing this. I love performing in mixed martial arts, really.
If I could be, I guess, intrusive, when you say the love of combat sports, the love of the performance, what does that mean? What does that tangibly mean to you?
I guess, I mean, I love competing. Obviously, I'm in the gym now on a regular basis and competing against some of the best guys in the UK at London Shoot Fires, and it's kind of, I guess, only a natural progression to want to compete against other people outside of the gym. It makes perfect sense to do it in a show like Oktagon, or in any show really, but a show like Oktagon's given me the opportunity.
So I'll come back to the competition aspect because I think that's an important point. But you mentioned sort of in any promotion, let alone Octagon. What happened with the UFC? What was the road that took you to Octagon?
I think, to be honest, with over 8 years out in UFC being obviously a high competition level, like they didn't really know what to do with me, so they said I could have a leave and take a couple of fights or a fight somewhere else just to, I guess, get the ring rust off and see how I perform.
Okay, so are you technically still under contract with the UFC?
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. I mean, I'll probably find out when Yasada turns up at my house at some point. But
Yes, fine. So I'll go back to the competition aspect because I think that's important. Is that obviously you're somebody that's been involved in high level sports throughout your life, being a decathlete, the rugby background, and then obviously the wrestling and MMA. Has competition? Do you think competition is something that you were born with, or is it something that was bred into you? Do you think it's something that's both? How do you think that competitive nature sort of has manifested itself in you?
I guess to a certain extent, I mean, I always had two older brothers, so I was always competitive. Obviously, Stuart, the middle brother, is like pretty close in age with me, so everything was like, I mean, he was always, I guess, not necessarily recent, or he's still faster than me, but like it was always like super neck and neck between us, if that makes sense. I was like almost his size anyway. Obviously, he's over a year older than me, but everything was super tight between us competitive wise. And obviously, then we had another older brother, Matt, who's 5 years older than me, so he could pretty much beat us in everything until later on in life. But yeah, he just drove us on. I mean, me and Shu used to play against our oldest brother in rugby in the back garden, which again was, I mean, had to use teamwork, but it's still pretty much unfair. We'd never get past him because he's 5 years older than us. He can pretty much pick both of us up in one hand each, at their age. But
And do you think that the rugby background sort of stood you in good stead for a transition to mixed martial arts? I mean, obviously, it is a combat sport. It's not a combat sport in the traditional sense, in that you're not fighting technically, but it is a very heavy duty, very grueling, very grinding. There's obviously a lot of relationships to wrestling. Do you feel as though that rugby background stood you in good stead?
definitely, I think it helped massively. Obviously, the other thing is it always gave me 15 other friends to kind of grapple and learn how to do combat stuff with as well in spare time, really. But again, other than being a team sport, it's very similar in a lot of kind of in the physical aspects of it anyway.
Right. And I think that was one of the things I was going to ask, was about the relationships between the sport. Like, how do you identify those relationships, and what specific tangibles did you take from your early sports career into wrestling and into MMA?
I guess again, it's a kind of multi-directional sport anyway. You're never running in just straight lines and stuff like that. So you've got the kind of angle changing, the rotation, the movement. You've got contact, so it's very much from say almost like a pummeling aspect in wrestling, and grappling, where you're driving into someone, you're trying to gain leverage and make angles and stuff. So I mean, other than necessarily, I mean, the actual throwing a strike is probably the only thing that really isn't in rugby that doesn't, that you can't just straight transition over. But again, it's just building basic kind of athletic kind of blocks by doing sports young, really.
Right. And I wanted to then talk about wrestling. So obviously you're a prominent wrestler in the UK scene. We've seen you in actual wrestling competitions. We see your name on lots of grappling industry competitions and in Grapple Fest and these sorts of things. Can you speak to your love or passion or how you identify with grappling specifically over the striking elements of mixed martial arts?
Definitely, I'd say probably my more favorite thing. I mean, I was always considered myself in grappling was what I predominantly was good at the beginning, but I always considered myself a wrestler boxer kind of thing. I mean, there's so many good grappling competitions out there now and like on all the time. Like ADCC's only just finished up a couple of weeks ago. The World Wrestling's has been on anyway. So the Worlds in Wrestling's been on, which has been great to see. Again, Taylor beat Yazdani again this time. Yazdani's a good favorite of mine as well. So there's just always great kind of like grappling sports to watch nowadays. So I mean, it's highly entertaining and very exciting to watch.
And do you think that affinity comes from the rugby background and that it was an easy transition? You know, you mentioned that the only thing that's not in rugby is throwing straight rights or
Right.
throwing kicks or whatever it is. Do you think that the relation over to grappling and the affinity that you hold with grappling comes from the initial sport that you started with?
Yeah, definitely. I think just the love of contact is definitely what made it easier to kind of get into the grappling side of things and the wrestling side of things than the striking side of things when I initially started.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about identifying yourself as a wrestle boxer, right? MMA over the last 8 years has changed drastically. Styles have changed drastically. I think people have elevated their stock to be more generalists than there are specialists. Now, of course, there are outliers, and at the top tiers of every division, there seems to be somebody with a level of specialism. As somebody that sat on the sidelines for the last 8 years, in terms of professional competition, can you give your breakdown of what you think the evolution of MMA over the last 8 years has been and where you sort of view MMA in its modernity now?
I mean, I guess what I said earlier with being a wrestler boxer, I guess it's my particular liking style, you know. I guess like you're saying as well, everyone nowadays with modern mixed martial arts is so much more well-rounded, I think, but everyone will have a particular favorite or style what they like to go to. Like if you look at Adesanya, I mean, as much as I'm sure his ground is really good when he's fighting, he is a stand-up fighter who does wrestling defense. You know, kind of sprawl and brawl kind of style person, rather than I don't necessarily sprawl and brawl, but do you know I mean a stand-up guy who does defense and looks to not get taken down, you know, and counter after takedowns. So everyone's got a particular style. But I said, like, I completely agree with you. Like the level of MMA now is far more higher and far more exciting. You do have like the less kind of like pigeonhole people where like, oh, you know, if he gets taken down, he's got nothing on the ground, rather than like everyone's got everything on the ground nowadays as much as they have. You know, they'd be able to tap out most people, just maybe not the guys at the top of the thing. So I'm sure Adesanya is very good on the ground. The same with, you know, you look at Michael Page, who I train with, like his ground game is incredibly good. Like everyone I think thinks that like, oh, he gets grabbed or taken down, like people will be able to like get submissions on him, but he's incredibly hard to submit. He's incredibly hard to ground and pound. And obviously his stand-up kind of speaks for itself most time. You know, it's an incredibly effective stand-up style.
And do you is that something that concerns you, the evolution of the game? You know, we've seen a number of fighters take a period of time out of the sport, far less than 8 years, jump back into the sport and find that the sport has sort of gone past them. So somebody that this is concerning of me specifically is Jon Jones, right? Jon Jones is looking at a new weight class. He's obviously been out of the game for a long time. Yes, he's been training. Yes, I'm sure he keeps an avid eye, but there's nothing better than discerning your skills against somebody else who is actively trying to improve for professional competition. Do you feel like that the radical changes that have happened in the last 8 years is something that you've been able to keep up with in your time off?
Yeah, I believe so, and I think my camp and my training partners believe that as well. I mean, with Jon Jones, I'm incredibly excited to see him at heavyweight. I think he's going to do just fine. I think generally this is, I mean, obviously it's taken a long time to kind of actually get the match, but I think this is just going to bring the best out of him again. You know, I think he got not necessarily a bit lackluster, but like he wasn't necessarily super into it towards the end of his last couple matches at light heavyweight, but you know what he can do, and he can do it any time. And I think it's going to be re-bring out of him at heavyweight. And I think just generally excited from a fan point of view to watch it.
Well, as a fan, let me ask you a question about Jon Jones then. So my read on Jon Jones is at light heavyweight, one of the superpowers that he had outside of the physical attributes, outside of the fight IQ, was that he was a bully. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I don't mean that with any negative connotations, but he forced you to fight in a way that he was comfortable with. And he bullied you in that aspect, or he bullied his opponents in that aspect. How do you see that playing out? Yes, he's spent a significant amount of time in the weights room and he's added a significant amount of size on, but a man that is naturally 265 pounds and a man that's working towards 265 pounds are very different prospects, right? How do you think the bully mentality plays out at heavyweight?
I still think he'll do right. Again, I think it'll be slightly more speed rather than strength oriented. He's still going to be long for the weight division. It's not like he's as much as everyone's going to be bigger. It's not like he's going to be short or not long in his reach and stuff like that for the weight division or his legs and stuff. So I think he'll be right. And when you see most of his takedowns and stuff what he does, they're not necessarily like big super strength kind of things. They're just finessely timed, little foot sweeps, little trips and stuff like that. So I think he'll still have all that.
Interesting. I think Stipe is a nice matchup for him. If that's
if there's the one that happened, I mean, it's just going to be really exciting. As I said, I like Stipe as well, so it's just something what I'm kind of looking forward to. You know, and, I know it's been on the cards. I don't know whether it's actually been like finalized, but it's been said a couple of times now. It's enough to put belief into it, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some rumors circulating from some more credible sources in the last couple of weeks that's the fight they're looking for. And yeah, if it happens, I think we learn a lot about Jon Jones. I think we learn a lot about Stipe Miocic, right? I'm going to ask about a reintroduction to the sport in a similar way to Jon Jones. Is not reintroducing himself into the sport because, you know, it's Jon Jones, but for yourself, do you feel as though this era of MMA, is not the same. It's not the same fan base. It's not the same fervor. It's a far larger sport than when you competed against Don Young Kim in your last performance. Do you feel like this performance next week is a reintroduction, not just to MMA fans, but to MMA as an overall sort of sport itself?
I mean, I guess I'm still going to go out and do what I like to do and do what I've been doing in training, really. Basically, it was the same what it was, say, 9 years ago when I was doing that. You know, I'd train for a specific thing on what I wanted to achieve in the match, and I'd go out there and do my best and do my darndest to kind of achieve it.
Right. And is it a strange feeling? This is just me thinking off the cuff. Is it a strange feeling to think that you were competing in the elite of the elite division against extremely skilled competitors in your division, and after 9 years you're going to return and there will be a large portion of the fan base that haven't heard of your name or may not even seen your fights in the UFC?
I mean, it doesn't bother me. It kind of makes me laugh sometimes. I mean, I've been at gyms before where someone's come in and been like, "Oh, you first time grappling, is it? Like, oh, you grappling today and stuff?" And you're just like, "Yeah, you know, first time at the gym and stuff." And then someone else will come over like laughing, being like, "Do you not know who that is?" Like, well, obviously, but he doesn't. I said, like, these people don't necessarily have seen me years ago, you know. And again, he was just being friendly, coming along, being like, "Oh, you know, first time at the gym, you're gonna grapple today, you're enjoying this and stuff like that." So they're just trying to have a conversation, just be a nice person. That's all. So, I mean, I'm just not necessarily not forthcoming and being like, "Oh no, I've done it for ages." You know, I'm just like, "Oh yeah, you know, first time here in this gym." Not like I've done it for ages, but
I mean, yeah, I think you've done it for a significant amount of time at this
point.
I that's a really, like, that to me is a really interesting moral question. Is, you know, you've put a significant amount of time into your MMA career. You 9 years ago were at the pinnacle of the sport in that you were fighting in the UFC and had a good run in the UFC. Yes, okay, the last performance may not have gone how you wanted it to go. You know, as the saying goes, these things happen in MMA. You know, you can't be on your best performance every time. But then you come out and you see the sport evolving around you. You go to gyms and people are saying, "Is this your first time?" Or is this, you know, that to me speaks more about how you view yourself and how you view your contribution to the sport? Because I think there's enough people that would walk in and be like, actually, no, I have a contract with the UFC, or I have this, or I've been fighting this, or I was here, there, in the next place, right? Like, can you speak more to how you, from a philosophical perspective, view your contribution to fighting?
I mean, I don't know what contribution I've made. I mean, obviously the UK scene now is an incredible scene with a bunch of great talent on it and stuff. Obviously, I was there in the early days, but there was still a load of good talent back in the day and stuff like that. Obviously, I was the young one coming up, but as I said, I just kind of like to go to gyms and just kind of get stuck in. I don't necessarily wear like super branded clothes all the time or anything like that. Wouldn't necessarily know that I'm any different, but I shouldn't be treated any different. I'm just a normal guy. He should be trying to tap me out. I should be trying to tap him out. That's all. It's what the game, what we're in is basically.
Right. And I mean, from personal perspective, you've come down to London Grapple a number of times, and I've had the, I don't know whether I could call it displeasure or pleasure of being in your front headlock game for a significant amount of time, and it was horrendous. And you know, it was, yeah. I mean, I think that's a really interesting viewpoint that not many people hold, and that's that the game is larger than us, right? The game will survive whether we are in it or not. And I think you downplay slightly your importance to the British scene,
But
because
if it wasn't me, it was going to be someone else. So it doesn't matter whether I was there or not. Someone else was a standout guy who was going to come out, who was going to be able to grapple and wrestle and do stuff what necessarily anyone expected of British guys. You know, there's plenty of them now as well, which is great, and they can all do everything, which is awesome.
And I think that's part of my point. There's plenty of them now.
Right.
And I think that there has to be somebody that goes out and shows that it can be done. Now, I'm not saying that you're the only British guy at the time who go out and wrestle, sure. But when you're in the UFC and it's a very North American audience and a very educated audience on the grappling perspective of things. And when you've got John Anik and Kenny Florian and these guys who are obviously American and have come up through the high school system, have seen the wrestling, and they're talking about this British guy who can wrestle and can grapple, I think that holds a significant amount of weight, especially in 2014, right? Especially in 2013, 2015, you know, these are important steps, I think, for people like the newcomers, like a Jake Hadley and Nathaniel Wood and a Lorna Taverner who's coming through, and the guys in Shoot Fighters that are amateurs that nobody knows yet, but they're coming, and they're looking at people like yourself, and they may have watched fights from the UFC in your time and have been like, oh, this guy can do this stuff that we're not supposed to be able to do in this country. This guy's able to do stuff. So I hear your point of somebody would have done it, sure, but I think to me you answered your own question in that guys are very well rounded now, but somebody has to show them that can be done at the highest levels, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such a shame because obviously Americans got their collegiate stuff, so they have it all through youth. Like the Middle East and the Eastern kind of Europe have like loads of wrestling. We're just kind of sat in the middle, not doing really any wrestling stuff. Although like now, obviously, there's loads of it over here, loads of wrestling classes in every kind of grappling gym. But so it's great to see. But yeah, it's odd how we just didn't have anything really necessarily here, big profile wise, for ages. Well, we did, but just not used enough, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that that's because football and tennis and rugby and these sorts of things are more dominant sports? What do you think the reason for the lack of wrestling is here?
I have no idea, to be honest. And maybe it's just hard work, or maybe it's something what people shy away from. Although, like I was going to say, like the close contact of grappling is such a big thing, and everyone loves it now. But I guess, I guess we had rugby. I mean, it was probably our kind of closest contact sport before that, really. But I mean, even then, like it was funny because we had the wrestlers over here. We had Iranians, we had like Eastern Europeans, Russians, and Chechens and stuff over here. And it was only like, I think when grappling became so big and MMA became so big, like people were like, oh, I need a wrestling instructor. All of a sudden, like everyone knows someone who's like, oh yeah, like, oh, Martian can wrestle, you know, and you're like, he's a Polish wrestler, and you're like, oh, like you have all these guys over here that you just didn't know about until I guess MMA became a big thing and people needed wrestlers to teach classes and learn off.
Right. And I do think that that's an it's going to be interesting to see in the next sort of 10 to 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and onwards, whether we see an introduction of any grappling in school programs, right? Because there's an amateur MMA fighter, I can't remember what gym he trains out of now, but he comes down to London Grapple relatively often, and he has partnered with a primary school and is doing, like MMA classes, obviously without, actual
without too much intensity. Whatever.
But it's like takedowns, and it's some submissions on the bottom, and it's control, and it's all of these sorts of things. And the kids love it, right? Because it's essentially roughhousing, right? It's essentially fighting with your friends on the field, but without actually beating each other up. And I wonder whether there will be a shift in mentality in schools in the UK where grappling is seen more of a sport and less of violent and grotesque sort of endeavor. What do you think?
I mean, definitely. I mean, that sounds super cool. I'm super glad someone's doing it. Do you know what I mean? But it's 100% something going, especially in the early days, on how they kind of like personified like mixed martial arts as cage fighting and brutal and this, that, and the other, rather than it is a sport, and it's a very good sport. Obviously, it's been around since incredibly old time in pancration in the old Olympics anyway. So it's something that should be kind of venerated and respected, rather than condemned.
Yeah, I guess that's a part that I maybe should have expressed in the earlier questions of how sort of the UFC has changed, or MMA has changed more globally, is just the way it's viewed, right? The fan base has grown so widely, and for the most part has grown with a level of education that's different to other sports, right? You can go and you can watch a football match or a rugby match, and there'll be people there, maybe less rugby, I think they're more educated, but football specifically, that some of the fan base will go and not really understand what the rules are. They just know that balls go in the back of the net, and if not, that's a bad thing.
And that's their team, and they like them, so...
Right. Whereas you could go to any amateur MMA show, and there'll be people in the crowd that understand the nuances of sweeps from the bottom, or understand some of the cage wrestling transitions, or understand some of the clinch transitions, or understand when striking is good and when striking isn't good, or what's crisp form or what's crisp technique. Like, is that part strange to have watched? You were competing at a time when there still were newspaper articles about cockfighting and cage fighting and this and that, and now you're looking at one of the fastest growing sports in the world. Like, is that I mean, how does that make you feel? How do you view that?
It's not strange. I think it's just super cool. As I said, like on venues where I was fighting at, probably when I was younger, coming up and building myself up through the ranks, it would just be a room full of drunk dudes shouting, "Kill him," pretty much. A lot of times, I mean, that was I guess your average punter of like someone coming to a mixed martial arts show. Was just like they just want to see a bit of carnage, a bit of blood, stuff out. Rather than now, I said you get guys who are in the crowd who are like, oh, like he's moving up into a high mount. He's going to transition for an arm bar, or he's trying to isolate an arm for a side choke or something. Oh, like his striking is really good. Rather than like I don't think they wanted to see good striking back in the day. I don't know if they necessarily knew what good striking was. They just wanted two guys trying to knock each other out, really, or swing fences. So, right,
they wanted Fight Club.
Yeah. I mean, Fight Club was probably better than what they wanted. They wanted more like West Street or whatever, whatever street is in your local town where people get churned out nightclubs and start trying to take each other out. So,
yeah, it's strange. To me, it's strange. It's strange to see how important and how pivotal marketing can be, right? And how important and how pivotal in a lot of ways those three letters of the UFC have been in the bridging of the gap between this sport that we love and are deeply passionate about being presented to a fan base and educating them in a different way and changing their viewpoint. Now, that's not to say that other promotions haven't done the same thing, but of course, most people see MMA as the UFC, right?
Yeah,
they'll come to you and they'll come to you, and if they know you're an MMA fighter, they'll be like, "Oh, do you fight for the UFC?" Yeah. And the moment you say no, I mean, obviously with you, it's an interesting situation at the moment.
Right.
If you're an amateur fighter coming up, or if you're a guy that's in Bellator, like, obviously a lot of the shoot fighters guys are, and they say, "Do you fight for the UFC?" and you say no, they're like, "Oh, what do you do?"
It's definitely getting, I guess, better with people knowing, like, oh, they know what FC, they know Bellator now as well. It's names. I think even my dad knows what Bellator is now. Rather than it just being, another show. Like you're saying, like if it's not UFC, I don't really know it, rather than like a lot of people now know multiple different shows. And said it's just goes to the popularity of mixed martial arts, really.
Absolutely. And I wanted to, I've only got a couple more questions, and I wanted
Nice.
to talk a little about the darker side of MMA. As a man that's been out from professional fighting for a significant amount of time, there has been a lot of discussion about head trauma. There's been a lot of discussion about CTE and the effects of hard sparring, obviously both in the gym and then fights themselves. Is that something that you've thought about over the years? Is that something that's concerned you during your time out? Is that something that concerns you now coming back? Obviously, a slightly older man, more life responsibilities behind you,
Yeah.
right? Families and these sorts of things. How do you reconcile the findings that are coming out about damage to a fighter and the long-term effects of those things with the competitive nature that you have?
I mean, it's a hard one. Obviously, it's massive, obviously, in rugby as well as kind of combat sports and boxing. But I mean, it's that hard thing of like, I can't, I guess, mollycoddle myself too much. Like, unless I take a big shot, then I've not necessarily earned, I deserve like some time out, and you need some time out to make sure you're fully recovered from stuff before you can start thinking about going back into to get kind of, I guess, head trauma again, rather than, I mean, we're good in a sport that the fact that there's so much other things we can actually do which doesn't necessarily involve head trauma. Rather than, I mean, there is the same thing in rugby, but obviously you can't put yourself back in a game because it's so unpredictable. Rather than you can put yourself back into nice, like, I guess, MMA situational style things. Right, it doesn't even have to have strikes in. You can just be doing the grappling side of things, or some drilling side of things, or just shadow boxing. Not necessarily actually having any trauma for your arms to go up into your head, but obviously, it's a slight worry doing any type of sports, but again, you can't. If you worry about everything, you're not going to end up doing anything. So obviously, take time out when you've had a concussion or any type of hard head trauma. Definitely don't overspar yourself, but you're going to have to spar some before you go out there. I wouldn't necessarily say you have to necessarily spar every week, or multiple times a week, but you're going to have to do a couple hard sessions before you go out and compete doing it live.
Yeah, and I guess you've bridged my next question beautifully, and that's sort of training regimen as a man now with all of the knowledge that you've been, building over the years. Now, of course, you've not been out of the gym. It's not like you've been 8 years doing nothing, sat at home, doing whatever. You've been training consistently for those times, competing consistently for those times. Has your training regimen changed? Has the way that you treat your body changed? Has the way that you treat this sport as an endeavor changed from a training perspective from 8 years ago? And if so, how?
I mean, I probably definitely, I guess, train smarter, which means I probably train at, I guess, slightly less volume and just better at specific things. I know kind of how my body responds better for things, like whether it be, say, I like a good sprint session. My body responds very well to a good sprint session. Plus, they're nice and short and sharp, so it's not like I'm going out and doing sprints. And I wouldn't be doing, say, sprints like 3 times a week because I'd be a crazy amount. It would either be once or twice a week. If I'm doing something else, it would just be the once. So again, hitting, like I say, 2 good hard, like kind of cardio or windy sessions, like a sprint would be a good windy session. Making sure you kind of, I guess, doing like your volume of strength conditioning, but again, not at a crazy high pace because again, you've already done your kind of wind sessions twice a week. I think for me as well, diet wise, I don't balloon up like I used to. I don't know if that's just because I'm not necessarily interested in just gorging myself on sweets and sodas and stuff like that, or chocolate. So whether it's just because of my bowel, whether it's just because I'm old now and it's just not something that like massively interests me. It's not saying I don't like eating it, but it's just something that I don't have to do it like every day after a session, or every other day. So,
and that was going to be my last question, was about weight cutting. Weight cutting is something that I personally would love to make changes to
right.
keep fighters safer. And I personally believe that next to head trauma, which is unfortunately an absolutely necessary side effect of our sport, I don't feel like weight cutting is
No, it doesn't help it at all.
What are your opinions on weight cutting, and if you had the opportunity to fight closer to your natural weight, would you do that?
I mean, I like when they do it. They do it in some of the East Asian ones where they do it by a water weight, so it's almost like a weight class above. You know, I mean, at the moment I'm sitting under 82 kilos, so it's not like I'm far off 77. I've still got a week to go as well, which I'm still eating normal carbs and fairly normally. Obviously, just my volume of training is quite high. But I mean, it's definitely something maybe to take note of for kind of future things, you know, especially for crazy weight cuts. I never quite understand why people are doing anything more than say like 4 kilos. And again, that 4 kilos is like, I'll take that as like a welterweight perspective, because again, it's done on kind of like percentages to body weight, rather than like when you start going lighter weight classes like lightweight and flyweight, the number needs to come down on what you're cutting. You know, oddly, sometimes it goes up, which makes no sense to me, but people just do crazy things, I think, thinking it's going to give them an advantage, but it's not necessarily.
And I think this is where I take umbrage with this the most, is a lot of fights in the modern era, I feel like, yes, skill for skill based, of course. If somebody is drastically more skilled than the other person, then the likelihood of them winning that fight is obviously higher. But it feels like in the back of the fighter's mind, it's, I hope he has a worse cut than me.
Yeah.
I hope that when he gets on those scales and I have a look at him and he looks really gaunt and really tired, and there's no moisture in his mouth, I feel good about myself. Like, is that not the dumbest thing in the world? Like, I don't.
It makes no sense to me. I don't. A lot of the weight cutting stuff, I mean, it's just moderation. People need to do stuff in moderation with most of their stuff, you know. But everyone likes to just go a little bit more extreme, you know.
Right, and I won't name any names, but there's a UFC lightweight that I'm aware of, and he is very lean all year round. He's just a large human, and prior to his last fight, he got to the day before weigh-ins, and his water cut overnight was 11 kilos.
It's almost, you can't think of it as humanly possible. Do you know what I mean? When you think about what weight he's trying to be at, like, that makes no sense. He's trying to be at, what is it, 70 kilos? So that means he's doing it from 81.
Right.
That's a mad amount of body percentage. Like,
right, and that's after having done a full camp, which means dieting for a full camp, upping your cardio, getting your extra run sessions in, doing all of these things to bring your body naturally down in its weight to then cut 11 kilos. Like, the science that we're seeing on the lack of hydration on the brain and what that can do when absorbing shots, even that alone, let alone the stuff when it comes to coming out of a weight cut and what that does to your various systems, seems just wild to me. Really, really crazy.
I mean, it's brain, it's organs. You're taking water from places that shouldn't have water taken from them. Just
right.
Honestly, didn't know about that. That's madness.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Anyway, we'll move on from there, and we'll talk slightly about this coming matchup. So, what do you know about your opponent? How do you feel about your opponent? Are you somebody that looks into your opponent? Are you somebody that trains purely for your own game? How are you feeling going? And I don't mean like, are you excited or whatever, but this has been a long time coming for you. How do you feel going in?
I feel good. Again, I'm never someone who necessarily like, I'll have a little look at the guy, because I don't want to, I guess, get over focused on him being like, oh, he does this, and like change my game just to be able to match with his. I'm still going to try to go out there and implement what I do best and do my game on him, basically, rather than being like, oh, I'm just going to do everything to like stop his game working, which kind of, I guess, there's a couple of things you pick up to do against him. But other than that, a lot of the time, it's just about implementing your will on someone else.
Perfect. Well, I will wish you the best of skill for next weekend.
Thank you very much.
And I will thank you very, very much for your time. If for some reason people do live under a rock and they don't know who you are, can you please plug your socials or anything you want to plug, sponsors, anything like that?
I mean, you don't really need to plug too much. Obviously, I train at London Street Fighters. I've been out to London Grapple, 10th Planet London as well. All these great places you can kind of train locally, get out, get training. Obviously, the fight, I'm on head of prelims So I believe it's for free. You can get it on Oktagon TV, either their pay-per-view or the free fights are on their YouTube channel. And get out and get watching and get training.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time, Jon.
Absolute pleasure.